Okay, everyone, welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good break. Yeah, has anyone returned? Ready for the second last module, Broker VM. Very good overview of how Broker VM works, how to deploy it. We have a nice lab on it as well. Has anyone returned from lunch? Yes, good. Thank you, Thomas. Good. And some people have been messaging me as well in the background. Good. Thank you very much, Sammy, Tom. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue. We have a short module, but very important capability provided by Broker VM. So let's go through an introduction of Broker VM and how to deploy it, why you may choose to use it, a few different use cases. So by the end of this module, you'll be able to describe the role of a Broker VM in a Cortex XDR environment. Great, thank you. Describe the functions of different Broker VM applications. We call them applets. We're going to learn about one of them in detail in this module. And then we'll learn about another one when we cover a couple of other ones when we cover the 262 class on Friday. Yeah, so this is our introduction. We're going to know how to manage the Broker VM from the management console. How would you deploy a brand new Broker VM? And the applet that we look at in this module is local agent settings to act as a proxy between your XDR agents and XDR instance. So we'll look at how to configure, and you'll know how to configure and activate the local agent settings applet. So quite a short module, but I'll give you a nice demonstration. So what is a Broker VM to start with? Well, first of all, what's the word broker in English? You know, for example, if you need to get insurance or you need to get a loan from the bank, sometimes you don't go directly to the insurance provider or the bank. You go to a broker, someone that'll get you the best deal, right? So broker's a bit like a proxy for different things. And we have a Cortex XDR Broker VM. It's a Linux-based virtual machine that you deploy on-prem. There are different hypervisors we support. So if you run Hyper-V or ESXi or a KVM-based hypervisor, yeah, we have, you can, yeah, freedom of choice for hypervisors. And the purpose of a Broker VM is to bridge Cortex XDR's cloud components, like the instance, and our on-prem components. With our local agent settings applet, we're going to bridge the communications between the XDR agents and the XDR instance. The check-ins, policy updates, live terminal, everything will be now going through the Broker VM. Why might you need this? So as I mentioned before, your customers might end up with some of their workstations or servers that aren't allowed to have internet access. They don't have internet, but we still need XDR agent on them. And for full functionality, of course, they have to have some kind of connection to the XDR instance. Yeah, so for example, process control workstations. I worked for a bank and their automatic teller machines did not have internet access. Yeah, so for example, any type of machine that doesn't have internet, we can support its communications through a Broker VM. And you can deploy multiple Broker VMs. They're free. You don't want a single point of failure. So if it's important to you to use a Broker VM, you should deploy at least two for load balancing, and I think for HA, for high availability as well. And with your Broker VM, once you register it, well, first of all, you have to download the image that you need. I'll show you how to do that. Spin it up in your private cloud. Yeah, start it up in VMware, start it up in Hyper-V. And then you enable its applications. Each one is called an applet. And each applet provides a different type of mediation service between the cloud components and our on-prem components. So for example, we have a syslog collector on the Broker VM, another applet that can collect the syslogs from anything that sends syslogs. So we can ingest it into Cortex XDR. So we have many different types of Broker VM applications, but they all, again, are to provide some type of broker between on-prem and cloud components. Each applet has to be configured and activated separately. The applets that we have available are based on your license. I won't have the ability to even see the syslog collector applet, unless we have the Pro per terabyte license or Pro per gigabyte. Local agent settings, the one we learn about in this module, we have for Prevent and Pro. The Broker VM is very simple to deploy, and once it's installed, it automatically upgrades. So it automatically updates its applications and new applications when they're provided. So that way you don't need to worry about, any vulnerabilities when you haven't performed an upgrade when an upgrade was required. So before I give you a demonstration, here is a logical diagram of our cloud components where we have Cortex XDR, which is paired, here's our instance, our Cortex XDR instance in Singapore, let's say, which is paired with our Cortex Data Lake instance, which is also in Singapore. And the Cortex Data Lake, I've mentioned a few times, is really providing the storage for the logs and the alerts. XDR doesn't. It's the Cortex Data Lake that provides the storage, and XDR accesses the logs and alerts from the data lake. We also have a broker cloud service. You don't need to worry about that. That's in the cloud. And then here's on-prem. Now, on-prem, I've got a number of XDR agents. These agents don't have access to the internet, or they do, but I would like to maybe when they're doing their agent upgrades, if I have 10,000 agents in this location or 1,000 agents in this location, I want to use the content caching service so that the Broker VM can receive the content updates, XDR agent upgrades, and then provide them to all of my on-prem agents. Yeah. So here I've got XDR agents, and to proxy the communications, we use the local agent settings applet on the Broker VM. So this is the Broker VM that we've deployed in our private cloud. Yeah. If we enable local agent settings, we'll learn there are two different services. The one we look at configuring here is the proxy service. So whenever the agent does a check-in, it does a check-in against the Broker VM, and Broker VM performs the check-in on behalf. It's only the Broker VM that needs the internet access. I make a policy change for the management console. Yeah. And again, next time we do a check-in or we force a check-in from XDR, those updates will go through the Broker VM. If we're sitting here in the management console and I try to initiate live terminal session will also pass through the Broker VM to get to those agents. So that's the proxy service. We have a content caching service for the content updates for the agent and for the agent upgrade to save bandwidth. Instead of 1,000 agents all getting the updates directly from Cortex XDR, I'm only getting the update once on the Broker VM, which then provides it to my 1,000 on-prem agents. So maybe I've got a Broker VM in my Sydney data center for all of my Sydney XDR agents. I've got another Broker VM in my Singapore data center for all of my Singapore agents. Yeah. That way, again, they don't all need to communicate directly. We can save bandwidth that way. Okay, there are other applets on the Broker VM. The one we learn about is this one, the local agent settings. In the 262 class on Friday, we will learn how to configure and enable the network mapper. And the network mapper performs network discovery to build up an inventory of unmanaged assets, of IP addresses that don't have our XDR agent installed, so we can identify them in your environment. We have data collector apps. So I mentioned before, I've got a Cisco firewall or another third-party vendor firewall, we'll keep it generic, yeah? They can all send syslogs, yeah? So we enable the if I've got the Pro per gigabyte or terabyte license, I'll be able to enable the syslog collector, configure my firewalls, third-party, to send syslogs to the Broker VM. The Broker VM sends them to the Cortex Data Lake. By the way, any alerts from the agent, yeah? Alerts will also go through the Broker VM. If you configure these endpoints, these agents, to use the broker as a proxy, you have to configure that. And here we have a domain controller. Another data collector app we have on Broker VM is the Windows Event Collector that can collect Windows event logs through Windows Event Forwarding. So if we want to provide information, domain controller logs to Cortex XDR for analysis, we could do it with the Windows Event Collector. And with all of these different applets, they're all providing a different broker service to broker the on-prem to cloud components. Yeah. All right, so how do you get a broker VM? Let me give you a bit of a demonstration, then I'll come back and do some slides. First of all, there are no broker VMs deployed in a brand new Cortex XDR. So when you go to your settings configuration and you open up this list of broker VMs, you'll see 0. There is also now support to create a cluster of broker VMs for load sharing in HA. That's a new feature since I think 3.6 or 3.7 even. So normally, again, a brand new tenant, you'll see 0 broker VMs. We have used this tenant many times for many labs, you know, so we'll see many in the list. Okay, yeah, some are disconnected, most are disconnected, old VMs from long ago. Eventually, after 180 days, if we don't see these broker VMs, we'll see that Cortex XDR will automatically remove them. And we'll see a log for that as well. Yeah, but if you need a broker VM because you have none, yeah, you need to get it. And so here's the option, add broker, for you to download the image you need for your hypervisor. So do you want an OVA or a VMDK for VMware or something else that supports those file formats? A KVM hypervisor, a Linux-based hypervisor like Nutanix's and others will use QCOW2. It's a very portable file type. It's already a disk image. The virtual machine's already installed. I don't need to go through an operating system install. Yeah, I've got a VHD for Hyper-V and a VHD for Azure. So you can download the file format you need. Yeah, if I wanted to provide an OVA to my VMware administrator, if we run ESXi as a hypervisor, I'd download that, for example, or the VMDK and provide that to my VMware administrator. They would then deploy the VM for us, power on the VM, and then we would need to go through the registration of the broker VM to Cortex XDR. So in our lab, we've already done the deploy. We've downloaded and deployed the virtual machine. We don't have time for that kind of thing in a class. Yeah. But we also need to make sure that we generate a token to allow the broker VM to register when it's up and running. So I'll demonstrate that from my VM. I've already logged on to the Cortex XDR management console. And the reason why I'm doing it from the VM is just to make the copy paste operation possible. Yeah, so back where I was a second ago, under our data broker VMs. Let me show you first of all. In your lab, like in mine, we already have deployed your broker VM. Yeah, we gave it to our private cloud admin, my VMware admin, said, please power it up. Make sure you configure it with this IP address. And it has a self-signed SSL web server certificate. You can provision it with a CA signed certificate if you want, but otherwise you'll have to proceed. Yeah. And there is an initial password, and it stands for initial password. It actually says initial password, but with lots of fancy characters. So I'm gonna have to cheat for a second because I always mistype it. Yeah. So the first time log into a brand new broker VM, and this is a brand new broker VM, it is an initial password. You can see why I had to copy it, yeah? So asterisk, yeah, NITIAL, and then capital PASSW0RD. This is the first time log on to a brand new broker VM on its web interface, which we very rarely need, but to perform registration to our Cortex instance, we will need to perform this step. Yeah, so we log in with the initial password, first time log on, prompting us to change password. I'm going to use the recommended password for the lab so I don't forget it. And confirm the same password. Okay. And here is the web management interface for the broker VM, which again, we rarely need. But for me, I do need to configure my DNS. I need to configure DNS so I can resolve names to IP addresses. So I can resolve our Cortex XDR tenants. Yeah, so I'm adding another DNS. Maybe get rid of that one if I needed to. Yeah, if I needed to configure my default gateway, if my if the VM didn't start with that vNIC configuration, yeah, you can also configure the broker VM to go through your web proxy. If not everything can talk to the internet, that's supported. And if you want to use NTP, you configure NTP. Yeah. So I'll just save off that DNS change just as an example. You can see the success status there. But what I need to do is I need to register my broker VM to the correct instance. And when you perform registration, it requires that you provide the registration token. So first I go to the instance where I want to register the broker VM. Remember, there are many instances all over the world, right? I've come to Cortex-1 now, and I'm going to use the option to generate a token. And there's something about this token value that provides the broker VM with information about our tenant. So I'm going to copy this, because once you close it, you can't see it again. You'd have to generate a new one. And this token will only be valid for an hour. Yeah. So I'm going to copy that, go back to my broker VM web page and perform the registration. And notice over here, there is no green line to start with. We'll find a new successful registration status after we do the registration. Yep, that looks good. We'll do the register. And success. The broker VM registered to Cortex-1, not your customer's tenant, not my company's tenant. Yeah, I'll now find it in the list in Cortex-1. And now we have the broker VM identifier. For me, starting with XD8. And you will all need to identify your broker VM name so you can find it in the broker VM list. So mine starts with XD8. Yeah. And that's about all. I pretty much never need to use this broker VM web enrollment page anymore because I can do all the management from Cortex XDR. I'm now going to look for a broker VM whose name contains XD8. I think it was. Give it a second. Thinking. It was XD8, wasn't it? Or did I remember it wrong? It was XD8. Sometimes this happens, just refreshing. It should find one, at least out of the 124. You normally would not have this many broker VMs, right? Maybe I shouldn't have closed that page, right? Maybe I shouldn't have closed that page. I'll search for it from here as well. Two different. Maybe that's going to be faster for me. There, yeah. So it is there. But let's go back to my real browser because I prefer driving from my real browser. Strange. I'm going to pop out of this page, go back into the broker VM page. Still strange because it is the same instance, yeah? So just taking some time. Because that's taking time, I'll drive it from here. So here is my broker VM. So I don't lose it in the future. I'm actually going to configure it, yeah? And I can edit the device name. I'm going to put my name in it because we're going to use it in the lab next week. Sorry, the lab on Friday as well, yeah? So I'll put my name in there as well. And I can do all the changes that I made or could make from the web page of Broker VM. I can do that from here, yeah? I now no longer need to connect to the Broker VM, configure its proxy server, configure the NTP settings, enable SSH access, which is disabled by default, change the UI password, configure a trusted CA certificate. Same options as we have on the web interface. Yeah. So I'm not trying to change the configuration of my broker VM. I'll just cancel that. It finally did appear, yeah, over here in my real browser. So I'm now going to drive it from here. And you'll see it's running version 12.1. This is not the current release. It will upgrade itself. If we look in half an hour, 1 hour at your broker VMs, you'll see it will automatically upgrade itself. Yeah, so I won't trigger it, but you could if you didn't want to be patient. You can reboot it. Yeah, remove the broker, live terminal to the broker, or you can add an app. So based on my Cortex XDR license types, these are the apps. We have the Pro per gigabyte. So we include Windows Event Collector, Syslog Collector, Pathfinder, and CSV Collector that all require additional storage to be paid for. Yeah. So this is where you go about adding an app. Yeah. You choose the app that you're trying to add. I'm going to add the local agent settings to be a proxy between my on-prem agents and XDR in the cloud. So each applet has to be activated and configured. Yeah. So with our local agent settings, two different services. The agent proxy acts as a proxy between the agent and XDR. That's disabled. And there's the content caching service for content updates and agent installation packages, agent upgrades. That's also disabled. So you can have one or the other or both. Yeah, up to you. I'm only going to enable the proxy service. I'll choose something kind of random, a 4-port, like my 4-digit code for my port number. This is TCP. So we'll be listening on this port on my broker VM on all interfaces. So I've just enabled it on my whatever port number I choose. I'll activate the local agent settings. It's already upgrading itself, right? It's already got to 13.042 from a version 11. So we're seeing that happening in the background. I can close this off. I can watch the status from here as well about its apps. Here we go, another add option to add more or configure the ones we have configured. And it's now prompting me. Yeah, you've actually enabled the local agent settings in the background, but to make sure this applet will work as designed, please verify the following, that you configure the agent proxy on the relevant endpoints from the endpoint administration screen. Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go to my endpoint. Thank you. Close my endpoint administration screen. I'm going to tell my agent to go through my broker VM. Configure it, of course. Yeah, not tell it. So my agent has a host name with endpoint 7618. I did it again, 67. We'll get there. Good to see how to change things anyway. So there's my endpoint, and I'm going to right-click, endpoint control, and set the agent proxy. Tell this agent to go through my broker VM. Again, normally I'd want to deploy 2 in case one VM goes down, but my broker VM IP is 192, same as yours, .50, and the port number I chose was 6718. Yeah, I'm going to set that. Yeah, looks good. You can add multiple in case you have multiple broker VMs deployed. I'll set that. I'll make sure my agent gets that update by forcing it to perform a check-in. Otherwise, I just let it go in a normal production environment. It'll get the update. Yeah. And for me to demonstrate that we're really going through the broker VM for XDR communications, I'm going to do that with a kind of long lay. Yeah. So here I am on my XDR agent server. And just to remind you again, based on our IP address and our default gateway, yeah, our routing table for all non-local routes is going to send all other traffic not in my routing table based to the default gateway, 192.168.1.10. So if I don't have a network listed in here, like network 8, like we hit Google before, yeah, that's definitely going through this next hop. Yeah, we sent the Ethernet frame to the router, and the router routed the packet inside. Yeah, so that's working for me. I still have internet access. I'm hoping I've received the update. I really hope I've received the update, but I'll just try that as well. Yeah. Now let me do this. I'm now going to delete my default route from the routing table, like you'll do in the lab, just to make sure it's working. So I'm deleting my default route from the routing table. Okay, let's look at the routing table again. I don't have the 00 route anymore, yeah? So can I ping a non-local address? I missed it. Where's my ping to Google gone? General failure, don't know how to get there. There's no default route or explicit route in my routing table. Yeah. Can my Cortex XDR agent, so I can't get to the internet either, right? If I try to open a browser, there's no way I'm going to get to Google or anything. www.google.com. Used to work for me fine. Sorry, problem loading page. No internet. Can my agent perform a check-in? Yeah, last check-in was not that long ago, but it should update to 620 if we perform a check-in now. So if this updates to 620 something, that definitely is going through the broker VM to perform the check-in against XDR. Connecting. And there we go, 621.04. Going through the broker VM. Yeah, I can't be getting there any other way. I don't have a default route. My routing table. If I tried to perform a live terminal, yeah, or any other response, endpoint isolation if I needed to, that will all go through the broker VM as well. So as you can see, live terminal still works. Run Python scripts, whatever you need. So broker VM is very simple to deploy, yeah? Very simple to configure. So I save the log again, cancel. So let me catch up on some slides. To get a broker VM, we go through settings, configurations, data broker, broker VMs. You won't find this button anymore. You'll find this as an option under download. From the broker VMs list, you can manage your broker VMs, change the configuration of an enabled applet or enable applets that aren't yet enabled. Configure and enable each one. Okay. All right, so if you need to, again, the user interface slightly changes, but for broker management, the configuration of the broker VM settings, its NTP, DNS, things like that, control the broker VM to reboot it, shut it down, force an upgrade, remove it, deregister it. And then you have options. These days, you have to add the individual applets and then configure and add, yeah? So we have different application types. You saw me use local agent settings, which is an application for managed hosts. A managed host is an endpoint running our Cortex XDR agent. And I'm hoping that all of you after Friday, not, soon, but you will all prepare and pass your PCDRA certification exam. They want you to know in PCDRA, what do we provide with local agent settings? We provide two different services, the proxy service, the one that I configured and enabled, and the caching service for the content updates and agent upgrades. So it's one service, one applet that provides two services. We also have apps for unmanaged hosts, like the network mapper to identify unmanaged endpoints, something with an IP address that doesn't have our XDR agent. We have Pathfinder, which collects insights from agentless endpoints. And there are also data collector applications like Pathfinder to collect additional data about endpoints you don't intend to run our XDR agent on in your environment. So again, the one we want to focus on for this class and as part of your PCDRA preparation is the local agent settings applet. What are its features and benefits? Again, it has two services that we provide to the Cortex XDR agents. Each service can be configured separately, yeah? You don't need to enable both of them. You can have one or the other, or both. So the proxy service, the one I demonstrated, routes all traffic between our Cortex XDR agent and the instance. And the use case is when the agent is in a restricted network. Yeah, whether it's for security or it's isolated from the internet. Otherwise, if you're happy with the agents doing their own check-ins and policy updates and things like that directly, you don't need to use it. But certainly for endpoints that don't have internet, this is the option. This is the solution. And then we have the caching service. So the caching service is for the agent installation packages to perform upgrades and for content updates that come dynamically to upgrade the capabilities of my agent. Yeah, new BTP rules, new network packet inspection engine rules, new local analysis models and rules. So the benefit of the caching service is if I have 1,000 agents in my Sydney location, instead of 1,000 times the bandwidth required for an agent upgrade, it's my broker VM that gets the agent upgrade once and then can provide that to all the on-prem agents. So reduces the load on your external network. All right, and you don't need a special license. The question coming through. How does Network Mapper work? Yeah, so Kent, we're going to cover Network Mapper on Friday. We'll look at how to configure it, enable it, choose which address ranges to scan. If the question is, the methods that we can use for Network Mapper are TCP SYNs. If we get a SYN-ACK back, it's listing on that port, or it's ICMP. They're the only two methods the Network Mapper supports. TCP scanning or ICMP. Yeah, but we will look at how to do that and configure it and test it on Friday as well. All right. All right. Also, the other question sometimes people ask is how many agents can one local agent settings applet on a broker VM support? And it's now up to 10,000 agents. You can deploy as many broker VMs as you like. Yeah. So if I was a multinational with agents in Australia, agents in Asia, agents in America, I might have in my different data centers, yeah, a broker VM to satisfy those agents in those geolocations. All right, so on the broker VM, besides applets for our managed hosts, we also have data collector applications. And each data collector application is specialized for one log type. For example, syslog collector only collects syslogs. CSV collector, CSV. Windows event collector for Windows event logs. And over the years, we have introduced more collectors, a database collector to collect from a relational database, FTP collector, even a NetFlow collector to collect information about traffic flows in your network. So many different collector applications, but again, they require specific licenses. All of these require you're taking in additional data. So we need the pro per terabyte or pro per gigabyte. All right, so how do we deploy the broker VM? From your Cortex XDR management console, first of all, go to the broker VM page and use the option to download the image suitable for your environment. You're the hypervisor that you run or support in your data center. So download the VM image that you need, OVA, VMDK, VHD, a VHD for Azure, a QCOW2 supported as well, you saw. And then deploy the broker VM image to your network. If you don't manage the VMs in your environment, give it to your server team, the VMware team, get them to spin up the VM, power it on, complete the network configuration, the IP address, mask, default gateway, and DNS. And then within Cortex XDR, we have to generate that authentication token. It's not a key, it's a token. It's a registration token in the management console, and then paste that into the broker VM's web page. Once your broker VM is then registered, you then choose which applets to activate. Again, each applet has to be configured and activated separately. And you only get the applets that you have the license for. So that's the first step. Again, the user interface has changed. We now find the generate token option at the bottom of the download area. But here are the different file formats you can download. Deploy the image to your network. Get it up and running. Connect to it on its assigned IP address. Yeah, if you haven't configured a DNS record for it, just HTTPS to its IP address. And the first time password, which will force you to change at first time login is initial password. I won't read it out, but it is exactly this value. Yeah, exclamation mark there, and a capital P and a 0. No dots. Don't be confusing. I'm going to fix that slide right now. You know what? That's really bad. I'm going to fix that slide right now for you. Yeah, don't worry, just a couple of slides left. It'll fix it for me too next time. Yeah, if you're giving a password, don't put a dot and confuse people. Okay, fine. Likewise, we don't need a dot there at the end of the IP address, we'll say. All right, so do your first time log on, change your password. And then if you do need to change the network interface settings, you can. If you do need to change default gateway or add another DNS, you can. And down the bottom of the form, this is actually the user interface in the XDR management console, not from the web page of Broker VM, but it's the same options. You can go down and configure the broker to go through your web proxy. If you still use one, it's a bit old school. An NTP server configuration. SSH access is disabled by default. And one of the reasons, by the way, that we don't look at the content caching service config of the local agent settings is because it requires certificates to be provisioned to the Broker VM as well. But you can provision it with SSL certificates, a CA signed certificate that is able to be verified by your clients. Again, that's really, we right-clicked on the Broker VM and hit configure through the XDR management console, but we're talking about doing a first-time login to the Broker VM webpage. And on the Broker VM webpage, if it does have internet access and DNS it needs, you've already generated the token from Cortex XDR management console at the bottom of download, and then copy it and then paste it into the registration page. Right, once you then locate your Broker VM, I showed you when the Broker VM does register successfully, all of a sudden we get a new pop-up. We get a new green line, and that showed us the name of the Broker VM, so we can then go and search for it in the Broker VM list. And then, yeah, right-click. I want to activate local agent settings, and then choose which services to enable. If you just want the agent proxy, enable, choose the TCP port number that you'll configure your XDR agents to use to get through the broker. So very important service. Yeah, many organizations need Broker VMs because they have many of their machines don't have internet access. Yeah, for security reasons, process control environments, yeah, military, financial, depends on which machines in which part of the network. Healthcare as well. Some aren't allowed access to the internet. So if you do have questions, you're welcome to ask. But hopefully now you've got a better idea about the role of a Broker VM in Cortex XDR. You know how to deploy a Broker VM. You describe functions of different Broker VM applications, like the syslog collector versus the local agent settings. You know how to manage a Broker VM from the management console. You know which two services are provided by local agent settings. You'll get asked about them in your exam. I'm giving you clues now, yeah? Proxy service and the caching service. You know how to deploy it. You know how to configure and activate. So again, if it was my environment, I would really want to make sure my endpoint is actually configured with more than one broker. Yeah, I want to make sure that, I can't see which Broker VMs it's using. I've already configured it to use a Broker VM. And I can't see that anymore. I can set more, but I can't see that it's configured on my agent. I'm in trouble now. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to my agent for a second and cite to a proxy query. Am I going through a proxy? What's the supervisor password? It's the one in your text file that I've shared. It's not proxy query. I thought it was a query. Sorry, off the top of my head. There's cite to a proxy set, so I can disable the proxy with empty values. Cytal proxy, I'm sure there it is, yeah. Cytal proxy, why didn't it like that? Maybe it's my supervisor password was wrong. Cytal proxy query, try one more time and not talk. Maybe I didn't give you the right password. Did someone change the supervisor password? Is that why people have been having trouble? Is that possible? Has someone changed the supervisor password? No. I can check in my audit logs. But yeah, that should have shown me the list of my proxies configured, yeah? And if I want to undo, I can say Cytal proxy set. I want to undo my proxy, yeah? I've got the supervisor password. Try one more time. Password. Someone has changed the supervisor password. Wasn't it working for us all before? The supervisor password I gave you when we were using Cytal? Has anyone else? I think someone had a problem during the lab, and I said, yeah, is that the password you were using and you still got locked out? Tom, it was Tom. Because this will be a problem for us if we don't know. How do we get around this problem? How do I get around the problem? Easy, right? If we don't know the global uninstall password, we have control, yeah? So I can control my own agent settings, my own supervisor password in my agent settings profile. So maybe if you have the same problem when you do the lab, what you'll need to do is go and find your agent settings profile. And I'm going to update my uninstall password to use the one I just put in the chat. Yep, the one that we've thought it was for the first couple of days. And it was working for the first couple of days. I think someone else in the lab has changed it on us. So what I'm using there is this one, yeah? And then again, next time I do a check-in, that will be my supervisor password. So not a huge problem, yeah? If you need to fix it yourself. All right, if you have questions, you're welcome to ask. Otherwise, I'll give you plenty of time to do this lab. You'll do pretty much what I demonstrated. You'll connect your already deployed broker VM. You'll register it to our Cortex XDR. You'll configure and enable the local agent settings applet. So this is the last lab. Hang on, is it the last lab? No, we got one more lab. Yeah. Oh, hang on, this is the last lab. Correct. This is the very last lab. So we have a wind down module at the end of this. Yeah, I'm going to give you time for the lab first. And then we'll do wind down last module, course wrap up. Yeah. But I would love all of you. You need your broker VM running for when you set the 262 class starting tomorrow. Yeah, we'll need to use it again to configure the network mapper applet. So please do perform these lab activities. I'll give you plenty of time for it. It's still early, only one last short module. If you want to go for a short break first, that's fine too. I'll probably give about till 3:30 for this lab plus break time. And at 3:30, we'll come back. We'll do the last module together. Yeah. And you should be free before 5 for sure. To really make sure you can be free before 5, if you haven't gone to Beacon, and I can check, I will check now. If you haven't gone to Beacon to update this, to complete the survey, please find the event in Beacon for our class. I can't demonstrate creating the survey. I don't have that option, but you'll have an option to complete the survey. Yeah, no one's done. Thomas, thank you very much. So I will only be happy when you have all completed the survey before you say goodbye this afternoon. Yeah. So this will be lab time plus break time till 3:30, then the last module. Do your survey somewhere in between. Call out anytime for help. Sorry, Thomas, I'm not sure what you mean by the question. Should we use 1.50 as the broker VM without deploy? Oh, yes. Yeah. So the lab tells you your broker VM has already been deployed. Yeah. Please read always the lab introductions. It tells you your broker VM, we've already done the deployment. So all of you have a broker VM on that 192.168.1.50. Tells it that in step two. They just want you to see the options from step two, but then they give you a note. Your broker VM is there already. Just generate the token. Yeah. Yeah, maybe do that from the browser on the virtual machine so you can copy and paste into the web page of the broker VM. Yeah. Yes. So I'll say yes to that. Tom, please see note in step two. Everyone, I am resetting the default global uninstall password to what it should be. Yeah, password. Yeah, I've sent it already in the chat. You know what it is. So you shouldn't have trouble. You shouldn't need to change your own agent settings profile. Oh. Oh. Mm. 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 I'm so sorry. I was muted. Okay, welcome back, everyone. The last module. Any questions about the final lab? Broker VM. There was a question that came through. Can you change the agent proxy from the agent settings profile? No. So I answered you can configure it from the right-click option on the endpoint, but you can't even see it from the endpoint. You can if it's configured with SciTool proxy query. And there's also MSI exec. Yeah, MSI exec. Maybe I've got it noted somewhere. Maybe I do. Give me 1 second. MSI exec, when you do a command line installation, maybe for remote installation, there is port for the command line option. Let me see if I've got it written down somewhere I can share it. Just let me dig around for a second. I don't. Second. Okay. Yeah. Just to answer that question, if you have any other questions, while we're just waiting for me to get that together, for those of you that have not yet completed the survey on Beacon, yeah, I want you to do this before we wrap up. So some of you have. Yeah, we can see the survey completed for Carter and a few others. But the rest of you, please do connect to Beacon while here in class and complete the survey. And don't be too rough on me. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it. That's my short thank you. All right. So yeah, you know how to get to Beacon. Just a matter of going into the event list. You'll find under My Events, and you'll find our event, and then enter it and use the option to complete the survey and to download your course attendance certificate. Yeah, the official certificate from Palo Alto Networks. Here's my MSI exec. Yes. QN, log file, VDI, proxy list. This is the right URL to share from the administrator guide that shows you the command line option to install the agent. Well, it's 7.9, but anyway, still relevant, using MSI exec and the different command line switches. Proxy lists is one of the options. Yeah. Quiet installation, so the user doesn't see it. You can do that too. Restrict live terminal, restrict script execution, other options that can be enabled during installation. So to whoever sent that question, I hope that kind of answers Thomas. Yeah. All right, so while I'm talking, please do complete your surveys. And let's do the last module. Just a bit of a wind down. We're going to talk about some things we've already discussed, but this will put it all into perspective. We're going to understand more about our deployment considerations, talk more about the Cortex XDR operating environment. Once again, we'll review the role of the CSP account and a CSP user to provide authorization to an XDR instance by assigning a role to a CSP user. We'll also go through dependent services. So Cortex XDR has what we call dependent services. We manage them from the hub. The hub is apps.paloaltonetworks.com. One of the dependent services is our Cortex Data Lake. Another one that's optional, not really dependent, is the Cloud Identity Engine. So we'll learn what that does. We'll talk about the process for instance activation and how to restrict instance access through role-based access control and scoped-based access control. I have to change the proxy setting for a group of endpoints that had installed and functioned all at once. Do it through group policy or something. Yeah. Run a Python script, right? Run a Python script. Yeah, with the appropriate SciTool set proxy. There would be many options, Thomas. Yeah. And one of the things we'll learn about is we have the ability I'm hoping you would be with me for 262 starting tomorrow. Yeah. Singapore time zone. Instructor me. And we find The participants, yeah, I've got you again. Some people are different. To tell you the truth, Terry's going to be different. Sean will be different. Some of you are attending. Yeah. If you're not attending 262 tomorrow, please do. Yeah. It's very important you complete the training because this is the analysis and response class. Yeah. So please make sure you do attend some other time. If you're enrolled and you couldn't, get a place on this one starting tomorrow, do it another time. Drive. For sure, it's a great class. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So by the end of this module, you'll be able to access the customer support portal and add a CSP user to an account. The first step in providing them with access to Cortex XDR. You'll be able to work with CSP roles, name Cortex XDR infrastructure services, and describe some of our different installation regions. You'll know how to access the hub and manage your infrastructure services, like your Cortex Data Lake instance, your Cloud Identity Engine instance. You'll be able to describe the steps to activate a Cortex XDR instance. Not everyone gets to do that. It's a very lucky person. It's a one-time job for each instance. So I was the lucky person that got to do it for my company. It's a very simple process. You'll understand the steps. You'll be able to describe the different Cortex application roles that we have, how to work with those roles for role-based access control, and also how to restrict access, not so much to certain areas in the management console, but more to the information about certain endpoints in the management console by using a feature called scoped-based access control. So the first little section is understanding the role of a CSP account and CSP users. Yeah, we started talking about that on Monday when I had to add you as a CSP user to our account to then provide you with a role in Cortex XDR. So here is the customer support portal. When you log on to the customer support portal, you are logged on to your current account, and an account is the identity for a company. So you can see this account from the account selector, Palo Alto Networks Education Traps. Some organizations have multiple accounts. In fact, my company does. One for our production assets. Yeah, for my company's firewalls, my company's panoramas, things like that. We have the company account. But when we provide training internally in my organization for XDR and for other products, we have another account. So I can provide a student with access to our training only account. So we have an account selector, but you're always placed in your default account, typically your company. So if I was to manage the users in this account, yeah, I won't find you. I didn't add you to this account. I added you to the correct account where our resource is. Yeah. Many different assets. And the users are, yeah, as you saw on Monday, to provide you with access to our Cortex XDR. Let's do a filter by someone's first name. Got a couple of Josephs. And so there's Josephs with limited user role on CSP on the customer support portal. So you don't have the ability to go about adding, creating a customer support case or something like that, or registering a firewall. But this is the minimum role required to then give you a role in CSP to then give you a role within Cortex XDR. Yeah. So again, a CSP account is the identity of a company, whereas a CSP user is the identity for a person represented by an email address. We can use the customer support portal to perform account management, to manage the company information when we talk about accounts, and we can perform user management. Yeah, someone within your account, a super user, created your CSP user. Yeah. So user management can be performed. We can add or remove users to an account. So again, we have the account selector. When you sign in, you're part of your default account. I think you're all comfortable with that. Slow me down if I'm going too fast. So for me, some classes, last week was a nightmare. None of my students had a CSP user. None of my students. Normally for me, it's a matter of going into the correct account, going into members, managing users and saying add user to account. And this is the step we need to do for a user who already has a CSP user account. It's not creating a new user like your super user did for you. So I don't know your credentials or anything like that. I just went through the process in the correct account to go and add. You can see it's actually over there for a second. Yeah, to add a user who is already a member of another CSP account, just click add user to the account. All right, you've already got a CSP. I'm going to add you to this account as well, and then give you a role in this account. Optionally specify expiration, which you saw I did for each of you, yeah? And that way, I could then find you as a CSP user in my Cortex XDR. So this Cortex XDR is part of that account. And so now we're in Cortex, of course. And I found the CSP users in that account. Not everyone has a role for XDR login and authorization. Again, we'll just find Joseph, do a quick filter or something like that. Both Josephs and the others already have a role, yeah? But we find the user that was just added to the CSP account as a user with no role, yeah? So we then go into edit the user and assign to them a role. So if you're not, so why would we need to do this? Let's say, for example, one of your customers, they have their CSP account, company X, we'll call it. Yeah, and they have their Cortex XDR instance, but they need to provide you with access. Yeah, so someone for that account would go and add user to the account as a limited user, so we can then provide you a role in Cortex XDR. All right, so again, the minimum role you need as a CSP user to get an authorization in XDR is limited user. You don't need to be a super user or anything like that. So here's the process, yeah? The existing CSP user, activation date, expiration date, at least limited user, optionally description. Yeah, must by minimum. They want you to know that. To provide access to Cortex XDR as a minimum, CSP limited user. And then we can assign a role within Cortex XDR. So how do we create a CSP account? And how do we create the first CSP user? So what happens is when a company buys their first product, typically a firewall from Palo Alto Networks, and then Panorama to manage a bunch of firewalls and that kind of thing, they will go through the customer support portal to create the account, and it also creates the initial CSP user that becomes a CSP super user. Yeah, so someone's done that for your organizations a long time ago. You all have CSPs. Yeah, but the important thing about that first person who created the CSP account, your first CSP super user, is that first CSP super user is automatically granted XDR account admin. And that's the role that is needed to perform instance activation I talked about earlier. Yeah, so only one person in my company had that. Yeah, and I was sent an email that said, hey, we bought the license for XDR. Do you want to go to the Cortex gateway and activate it? And I had an authorization failure. So I knew what the requirement was, yeah, and I asked my account admin, XDR account admin, to also assign to me that role so I could perform the activation. It's the only role that can do activation. If you're the instance administrator, you can create new roles. You can grant or revoke roles to a CSP user. That's okay, but only the XDR account admin can do the activation on the gateway. So if you have questions, ask me, yeah? Otherwise, I'll keep on going. We'll look at how we perform the activation soon. But first, let's understand a bit more about our dependent services, the infrastructure services. So first, a logical diagram. This is all in the cloud. I have a Cortex XDR instance. This is where I get access to my management console. It has my causality analysis engine, my analytics engine. It provides us the ability to do all of our, analysis and response. But the XDR instance does not provide the storage. The storage is provided by the Cortex Data Lake that is paired with your XDR instance. So we have a Cortex Data Lake instance and an XDR instance, and they are paired during instance activation. We also have Wildfire, a threat intelligence service. Wildfire, remember, is shared, whereas your Cortex Data Lake instance is your company's. Wildfire in Singapore is shared in Singapore. And we also have another service in the cloud. It's free if you want to enable it, called the Cloud Identity Engine. You have to create a CIE instance. If you want this, it's free. It'll run up in, the region you choose. And that way we can integrate your on-prem Active Directory or your Azure AD with Cortex XDR. So it's optional. I don't need this one, but there's always Wildfire. There's always the Cortex Data Lake. So the Cortex Data Lake is required, and Cortex Data Lake instance is needed. And we perform a pairing of the Data Lake instance with XDR during the instance activation, XDR instance activation. Do you need a separate license for your Cortex Data Lake instance? It depends on the XDR license type you purchased. What about Wildfire? So Wildfire is required. We don't have to do anything to turn it on, as you've seen. You can control it from things like the malware profile, whether we want to use it or not. But you don't need to activate a Wildfire instance. It's a shared service in each region. You don't need a license for it. And the pairing of your XDR with Wildfire is implicit. If my XDR instance is activated in Australia, my Wildfire region will be Australia. If XDR is in Singapore, my Wildfire region and Cortex Data Lake will be in Singapore. So the one we don't need, optional, provides an identity service. Some of you who have been doing Palo Alto Networks for a long time, you might remember this is the directory sync service. We now call it the Cloud Identity Engine, optional. We'll go through the process to activate your free CIE instance if you want it. And then we pair your CIE instance with Cortex XDR in the management console. So that's what we call dependent services. But again, CIE is optional. All right. So Cortex XDR, when you perform your activation, and update this one too, why not? Find the right slide on that. We have other installation regions, the one we have in the list here. You can see Singapore's listed. I have many students sometimes from India. I've got many students from Australia, and there are many other regions. But when you perform the activation of Cortex XDR, you get to choose which will be the install region. Why is that important? Well, with a regional cloud architecture, all of Cortex XDR and the dependent services are tied to a region, specific region, to ensure that the customer data remains within that region. It might be a government requirement or a corporate requirement, a regulatory requirement of some kind. It often is. So it's during the activation, you get to select the region to install, and the region will be the same region as your Cortex Data Lake instance, will be the same as your Wildfire as well. You can't make them separate. So a Cortex XDR install region will host your XDR instance and the dependent service instances. The Cortex Data Lake, which is accessed by the XDR instance. That's where the logs and the alerts go to. Yeah. Our directory sync service or Cloud Identity Engine, we should call it now, also in the same region. And the Wildfire Regional Cloud, which connects to a Wildfire Global Cloud. But that's a shared service. And there are others as well, yeah? In the documentation, you can see the full list. They keep on adding more as well over time. So do any of you know where your region is if it's not in this list? Is there a region, for example, for Hong Kong? Is there a region for Malaysia? Is there a region in China? But yeah. Oh. All right. Don't want to talk to me in the last module. That's fine. All right. How do we manage your Cortex infrastructure services? So we have a web interface called the hub. Even though the URL is apps.paloaltonetworks.com, we call it the hub. Yeah. So this is where we manage the different infrastructure services. If you want to learn about a service, you can go down and learn about it, or you can go and click on a service and then activate it. So for example, if you bought a Cortex Data Lake instance license and you need to activate the instance, you can do it from the hub. If you want to enable your free CIE instance, we enable it from the hub. To manage the storage of my Cortex Data Lake and analyze the storage utilization, we can do that from here as well. And you can also manage authorization for these instances using hub roles. So there are different roles to provide access to this, to the hub. So Cloud Identity Engine, yeah. One of the, some people sometimes ask, what's the benefit of CIE? Well, we looked at a couple earlier on. If I go down into my incident response, we looked at configuring featured fields, but featured fields based on host names, featured fields based on a username. Yeah. Jerry, created by Ronin, and Ronin created by Jerry. Good. Featured IP address or IP addresses, and we have Active Directory. We need to be able to collect Active Directory attributes. If you want to add featured AD groups or OUs, so we can add those featured fields. That's one example. We'll get extra quick launcher search options for domain name / username. Yeah. We have also on the first day we looked at, I didn't spell that right, but you get the idea, right? We can use quick launcher with domain name / username. Yeah, for a username. Also on Monday, we saw we can restrict access to Cortex XDR. We were looking at the security settings. And down here, we have approved domains. Yeah, to only allow access to Cortex XDR to users from the following domain. We need to do AD integration. Okay. So if you did want to integrate Cortex XDR with your on-prem or Azure AD, you would need to deploy or activate a CIE instance. Yeah, and they're trying to show you how you can do that, different methods. If you want to activate a Cortex Data Lake instance, you use the option to activate app. Yeah, to add a Cloud Identity Engine instance, yeah, hit the gear wheel, and then manage apps, and then you'll find the option to add an instance for the instance type that you need. If you need to configure authorization, then we have the access management, so you can choose which CSP user has which hub role to limit their access to the hub. And it's called a hub because you're using it like a hub. I can then go and navigate through. Maybe I have multiple CIE instances. Maybe my organization has multiple Cortex Data Lake instances. Yeah, so you can easily access your instances from the navigation side pane. And then here, for example, we're choosing under Cortex Data Lake. We have 2 instances and then can choose one of them. And then we open up the management interface. Not so much to manage, but look at the configuration, change certain settings, see the status of our storage. The Cloud Identity Engine, still a bit, yeah, old terminology, but again, and we'll talk about what you need to do to get CIE working coming up very soon. So one of the important dependent services that we have that provides the storage for our logs, our alerts, anything else we ingest is the Cortex Data Lake. So what is Cortex Data Lake? It's not just used by Cortex XDR, by the way. Many Palo Alto Networks customers use the Cortex Data Lake to send their firewall logs, traffic logs, threat logs, SSL decryption logs, things like that. So Palo Alto Networks provide a storage service called the Cortex Data Lake. It's cloud-based. It can collect, store, and access logs. When we deal with a Cortex XDR environment, we can take in the logs from network devices like firewalls, not just our next generation firewall, but through syslog collector on the broker VM, we can also ingest logs from third-party firewalls. We can take in the logs and alerts from our agents, as we've seen. Take in our cloud logs from Prisma Access, Global Protect, VM series firewalls or physical firewalls. The audit and flow logs from your cloud providers. Yeah, so we can find out what's happening in the cloud environment, who's been creating buckets and instances or deleting. Yeah, and take in also data from external alert sources. So there are different ways to activate a Cortex Data Lake instance. You can do it from the hub. If you've already purchased your license for it, you've got the auth code for it. And so you're prompted to enter the auth code through the hub. Panorama is Palo Alto Networks' centralized management server VM solution. Yeah, that you can use to manage multiple firewalls, Prisma Access, many parts of Palo Alto Networks services. And you also can retrieve the license from Panorama. It just communicates with the customer support portal directly. So it can also activate a Cortex Data Lake instance from Panorama. Or we can perform the activation of the Cortex Data Lake instance that we've bought during the Cortex XDR instance activation. Yeah, we'll choose that during the activation form. All right, so here's a look at the hub. So from the hub, we've gone into Cortex Data Lake. We found our Cortex Data Lake instance. There's the instance name, EduLabs. There's the region, Netherlands, Europe. It looks like we purchased 2 terabytes and 1 TB is allocated, 1 TB is unallocated. Someone's changed the quota for alerts versus the endpoint data logs that come from our agents. So the default actually is 20% for alerts, yeah, and 80% for the EED logs. They're not saying do this, just trying to say you can control certain settings. Yeah. And one of the very important things to remember with Cortex XDR, and please ask questions if you'd like to, how much storage do we need and what are you getting when you have a license for Cortex XDR? So we're storing I'll say this slowly, yeah? We're storing your logs for 30 days, yeah? Only for 30 days. There's a lot of logs that come in. Remember my pro agents, every 5 minutes, they'll send a log of what's happened. Process, resources, registry, file actions, network connections, every 5 minutes. I've got 10,000 agents. They're all sending, and they're all pro. They're all sending a lot of logs. So we only store the logs for 30 days. The alert and incident data is stored for 180 days. Yeah, so I can search back in time. We'll learn how to do this in the 262 class. I can search back in time using my query builder and query my logs, query for process executions, query for file actions, network connections, and many other queries, or use SQL. And what I'm doing is I'm querying my logs, but I can only look back in time 30 days. We only keep those detailed logs for 30 days. Again, the alerts and incidents, yeah, they are stored for a 180 days, 6 months. But what if the customer needs longer term storage? They need longer term storage for their logs. They need longer term storage for their alerts and incidents. They want more than 180 days for the alerts and incidents. So it is a common question, how much storage is required? Yeah, so with our Prevent and Pro, the minimum license is for 200 endpoints. And you need to be able to access your logs for 45 days, not for 30 days. So do you need to buy extra storage? Yeah. And to answer that question, one of the ways we can help provide some guidance is by using the Cortex Data Lake sizing estimator, which is on the hub. I'll share with you the URL so you can play with it yourself. It's there in your course guide as well. But with the Cortex Data Lake estimator, yeah, here's our recommended purchase so far. What Palo Alto Networks products do we have? So far, it's selected next generation firewalls. I'll deselect that. No firewalls. I've got Cortex XDR agents. Yeah. Here's my total storage requirement recommended purchase. Well, how many agents do you have? Well, I've got 1,000 agents. I'd like to be able to, and want to store their logs for 30 days, well, that's how much storage we're going to need, because we have to round it up to 1 terabyte with the terabyte purchases. Yeah. If I need to store their logs for 45 days, we'll multiply that by 1.5. Yeah, we'll double it. Yeah. Or 45 days would multiply, 30 days by 1.5. So this gives you an estimation, but that doesn't automatically store your logs for additional time. It doesn't store your alerts and incident data for additional time. You need to buy the retention add-on license. You need to tell Palo Alto Networks what retention add-on you need. My healthcare customer might need 2 years. My financial customer might need 1 year, whatever it is, yeah? So we have different retention add-ons. And this is factoring in pro endpoints. Maybe I don't have 1,000 pro endpoints. It's the pro endpoints that send the every 5-minute log. It's a lot of log data. Prevent doesn't, the basic license. We send the alerts. We don't send the, every 5-minute EED. If I also had next generation firewalls, I had to deploy in an office recently a couple of firewalls. How much, and I want to maybe log their events as well to the Cortex Data Lake. I don't know the log rate, so it gets you to choose which firewall model. The model in the office I installed recently for a customer is 2 PA440s in HA, active, passive. So only one would be active. We can choose utilization, standard, high, very high, or custom. I'll just choose standard. You can add another model. I've also got one of my data centers. I've got a 3260, also an HA, so I'll call it 1. And this is high utilization, and add whatever you want, and then estimate the log rate for that, and it goes up accordingly. Is this necessary? By the store, we have 30,000 endpoints. Not sure if that's enough right now. How much storage do you have? How much storage have you bought for your Cortex Data Lake instance? Yeah, I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know. Yeah, so yeah, everyone can see the question there. We have 30,000 endpoints. I'm not sure if that's, well, here you go. Here's what you do. Take that off. We'll say, and are they pro or are they prevent? That's the other issue, right? Because 30,000 pros, that would be a lot of, and how long do you need it for 30 days only? Wow. Yeah, 45 days will multiply by 1.5. Wow. So yeah, Kent, right. So these are all considerations, right? And this is the kind of thing your Palo Alto Networks account managers will help you getting the right sizing for your customers. And by the way, I'll show you it, I'll jump to this a bit early, but in our Cortex settings, we also do have our data set management down here. And I can see with my data sets, we'll talk more about these data sets when you do the 262 class, but the data set that my agents send their logs and alerts to is called XDR_data. Other log sources send to different data sets, external sources, a third-party firewall or Okta. Yeah, so we have different data sets in the Cortex Data Lake. And please notice here, we now have a differentiation between hot storage and cold storage. I tell you, our hot retention is 30 days. Your alerts and incident data, hot retention is 180 days. Yeah. Your pro per gigabyte alerts and incidents, hot retention, 180 days. But if you purchase the add-on retention license, we also provide you with cold range as well. So once the data gets older than the hot range, it then becomes cold. Yeah. It goes into cold storage. You can still search through it, but we don't have as many attributes to search on, just the most important ones. So again, best recommendation, Kent and everyone else, talk to your Palo Alto Networks account managers, help them to get the sizing needed for your customers right. I'm only a humble instructor. Yeah. I don't want to steer you wrong, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of customers do need additional retention. They buy the retention add-on license for their needs. And then after that hot retention period, after that 30 days, for example, for my log, it then goes into the cold storage range where I can still search for it, just not as searchable. Yeah, no worries. Thank you for the questions. It helps me to talk through the presentations as well. So there is the URL I shared in the chat for the Cortex Data Lake estimator calculator. You can choose multiple selections if you like. And the way it does it is it calculates 1 TB for every 200 pro endpoints for 30 days. So you could proportionally adjust it. So if 200 pro agents require 1 TB, we increase proportionally. The Cortex Data Lake is sold in 1 terabyte increments. If you need 2.05, well, then you really need 3. Yeah, it's sold in 1 terabyte. It always rounds up to the next highest. So if we had 400 endpoints, it would only be 2 TB. But as soon as you put a little bit more than 400, 410, it goes up to 3. Okay. And again, there is the retention add-on license, Pro per retention, or Pro per terabyte license for additional cold storage retention. And for regulatory needs, I've had many customers come through this class and partners like yourself saying, yeah, we need longer term storage for our healthcare customer, for our financial customer, for our military customer, whatever it is. So this is addressed by Palo Alto Networks with retention add-ons. Okay. Oh, we're going good. Now, while we're still talking, I'm almost finished. I'm going to check if you've done your homework now, because if I don't see just about a full list, I'm not happy. Yeah. So I'm please hoping you will complete the survey on Beacon. Wrong class. I've got to go back to the other event. Here's the event 260. My participant list. Better. Thank you, Gordon. Jack's their recent ones. Yeah. If you still see it's not blue next to your name, please, I'd really appreciate it. So will Palo Alto Networks. They've given you a wonderful opportunity for a great training session, and they'd like to know how it was for you, if there's any ways we can improve the session for you or customers in the future. Yeah. All right. So yeah, do that while I'm talking still, right? So the other dependent service, our Cloud Identity Engine, if you want it, it's free. You can activate a free CIE instance, and that way your Cortex XDR instance can access the identity data in your on-prem AD or from your Azure AD or both. Because it's syncing directory information, we used to call it directory sync service. All right. So there is a couple of requirements to get this to work. You have Active Directory. That's one requirement, of course. That you activate a CIE instance and you deploy on-premises CIE agents, which are members of the domain, which connect to the domain controllers. The agent will then scan domain objects like computers, OUs, users, and groups, and then send the object attributes to the CIE instance, configurable by you every 6, 12, or 24 hours. And then XDR can retrieve those attributes. For many organizations, they have more than one AD domain. We can use one Cloud Identity Engine instance to access the directory information from multiple domains. We'll have a look at a logical topology in a minute and what's needed to get this to work. Yeah. So again, it's free. We activate the instance from the hub, and we'll go through that user interface in the next slide. But the Cloud Identity Engine instance in Singapore, yeah, is going to have to be manually paired with my Cortex XDR, and yeah, is going to be manually paired within the management console to my Cortex XDR instance after you activate it from the hub. In fact, I'll show you that part now. If I go back to XDR, I then show you, there it is, under integrations, Cloud Identity Engine. Once we went through the hub to activate, we have one, to activate a new CIE instance, I then have to come in here and then manually pair my XDR with the CIE instance called, in this case, XDR Demo 2 in Americas. So that's the pairing that's already happened for this XDR and CIE. All right, so besides the CIE instance, we also need to deploy on-prem Cloud Identity Engine agents. One agent can only retrieve they're a member of the A domain. CIE agent 1 is a member of AD domain 1, so it can retrieve the attribute information it needs from the domain controllers. We have to configure it to communicate, well, properly with the domain controllers. It's a member of the domain, and to communicate with our CIE instance. We have deployed another on-prem CIE agent, a member of domain 2, so that it can retrieve the attributes and objects from domain 2 to provide to the instance, so that the CIE instance provides to XDR. Yeah. So this is free. These agents are free as well, but you have to deploy them on-prem. So here's the process. First of all, I'm using the hub. I'm going through the process to activate a new CIE instance. So it gives you a welcome, and it gives you different choices. Are you trying to set up your directory? Is it an on-prem directory or a cloud directory like Azure? Or is it something you can communicate with via SAML, some SSO provider, which you can use as well? So in this case, it's an on-prem directory. We go through setup, and then it guides us through that type of setup. So to configure directory sync for Active Directory, you need to download and install the agent on a Windows server that's a member of the domain to allow Palo Alto Networks apps to access your Active Directory. So now go and download the agent to install on the Windows server. Might just be a VM in your data center. It doesn't have to be the domain controller, yeah, but it has to be installed onto a server that's a member of the domain. You then have to generate certificate, get certificate to authenticate the agent with the CIE instance, and then to guide you through the installation of the agent on the Windows server, to configure it to talk to your AD and the directory sync service. It gives you further guidance on that too. So it's not needed, but you will get better data and more management capabilities in terms of limiting access to the XDR management console, in terms of featured fields, in terms of the extra intelligence analytics as well we can provide. Once your CIE instance is configured properly, is communicating with your agents in your Active Directory, then you still have to go through manual pairing of the CIE instance with your Cortex XDR through configurations, integration, CIE, and then add or edit the existing instance settings. And the very last part is almost second last part is talking about instance activation, XDR instance activation. So if you are going to be the person that gets to activate a Cortex XDR instance, maybe for your customer or for your organization, of course, a new instance or an instance, we also call it a tenant, we know that. The activation is a one-time job. Remember to make sure you relicense. Yeah, my company, we forgot to relicense. We couldn't log into our instance anymore. The agents were still working fine, but we couldn't log back in until we got the license again. Yeah, so activation is one time, but licensing is up to you to keep on relicensing. The activation process will spin up cloud-based components, databases, and services specific to your instance in the installation region you choose. The only role that can do this is XDR account admin. The only person that gets this by default is the first CSP super user, the one that created the company account, the CSP account. You receive an activation email, provides you a link in the email that takes you to the gateway. And for Pro per terabyte, you have to have a Cortex Data Lake instance attached to your CSP account. So if you do have XDR account admin or it's been assigned to your CSP, the way you perform the activation from the email, click on the link or go straight to the Cortex gateway, and you'll find at the top available for activation 1, and then select it and go through the activation by serial number. If you have multiple available for activation, locate it by serial number. It will ask you to go through answer a few questions. We'll look at the form in a second, and then you'll get to click activate. Yeah. And when you perform the activation, you are binding that XDR instance to your CSP account. It's a permanent binding. It actually can later change. They say he can't. Some people also ask me, can you move? My company created their XDR and Cortex Data Lake instance in the US, but we find that actually Singapore is better for us in terms of latency for a multinational company. Can I move my Cortex XDR instance and Data Lake instance from the US to Singapore? Yes, but Palo Alto Networks have to get involved. Yeah. If I accidentally bound the new XDR instance to the wrong CSP account, yeah, then actually that can be changed as well. But Palo Alto Networks have to help. Okay, they're very helpful. And through the Cortex Gateway, the form looks a little bit different now. This is an old slide from the 3.0 version of the class. We haven't updated it, but it will ask you what will be your tenant name. And the tenant name is just a friendly name. It's not part of your URL. Yeah. And then you must select your region from the drop-down. You'll get a list of the available regions. And then you must choose your tenant subdomain name. And this does become part of our relative URL, just like the region will become, yeah? So here's where there's a note. Doesn't look like this anymore, by the way. But the note says this is a public FQDN. Yeah, we're registering it in DNS. Please be careful with sensitive information, like your company name. Otherwise, again, it's predictable, yeah? Company name, .xdr.sg.paloaltonetworks.com. And we choose the Cortex Data Lake instance to pair XDR with. You agree to the terms and conditions, or you can read them first if you like, and then you click on Activate. And the gateway will eventually update if you're on the gateway, yeah, and this is where we're doing the activation from the gateway. You'll then find it starts activating, but it's not yet active. Yeah, it's activating. Only when it turns active can you then click on it and jump to that instance. So that literally, this is where you do the drop down from here, if there was one available. Same URL for everyone, yeah? Cortex Gateway. All right, so then we find after the activation, I think about 45 minutes, could be maybe an hour, the tenant status should become active. We can verify the region, our Cortex Data Lake instance name that it's paired with, the serial number of our XDR instance, and the license details. Already we know how to then click on it or manually open by your subdomain name, .xdr, the two letters for our region, .paloaltonetworks.com. Excuse you for 1 second. Yeah. Just before we do the very last part, now's your final chance to thank you for your patience, everyone, and your understanding. I've struggled through the last few days, but you've been very easy on me, so I appreciate it, yeah? So the very last section, instance access through role-based access control. Bit of a review, yeah? So how do we perform our role management? Once a CSP user is added to the account as a limited user on the CSP account, we can then give them a role in Cortex XDR. You can do that if you are the XDR account admin. You'll find the permission management button from the gateway. If you're the instance administrator, you can go straight through settings, configurations, access management, and find users and roles and manage them from there. So we have many more predefined roles. And there's also the ability for you to configure custom roles, user-defined roles. So the XDR account admin, a special privilege again, they can perform instance activation. They can create new roles, have full access to all the instance data. the role I assigned to you, I couldn't give you XDR account admin. I don't have that role in the Palo Alto Networks education account. So I assign to you just as much as I have instance administrator. You can't create a new instance. It doesn't matter. I just need you to manage the existing instance. But you can still create your own custom roles, assign users to roles, full access to the instance data. It makes no difference once the instance is already there. Okay. So again, I won't overdo this. How do I provide a user access to a Cortex XDR instance that's part of this account? Step number one, use the customer support portal. Make sure we're in the correct account. If they already have a CSP user, we add the user to the account. Yeah. And you remember the role we need to assign in the CSP registry is just limited user. We don't want them to be a super user and start deleting assets like firewalls and registering new assets and things like that. Yeah. So limited user is the basic role required. Make sure you're in the correct CSP account. Yeah. And then if you want to assign a custom role to a user, you can, or one of our predefined roles. Let me show you a bit on the role interface. Well, I can do a bit of it from here, but not for the account we're using. So I'll do it from our XDR management console. All right, so here we see a lot of roles that are built in, created by Palo Alto Networks, others created by users. So if we take a role like IT admin, and I want to find out what they can do, we can see a description. It doesn't really tell me what they can do if you're assigned that role. So if I open up IT admin, correct. You can clone it if you want to. If I click on it, it now shows us, based on what we see in the management console, when this role, a user with this role goes into dashboards and reports, they can view edit dashboards. They can read only ingestion monitoring, view edit reports. So whether we have read write or read only or no access. Yeah, just by clicking on that role. Yeah, view up, read only everywhere. Can't do anything. I can also see that from the perspective of a user. Now we find a user like myself. It's a bit slow today. All right, there's me. And then we edit user or remove user role if you want to, deactivate, no. And if we look at the assigned role of a user, we then see the accumulated permissions. So I can now see what would this role have under dashboards and reports. I can't change it from here. Yeah. But the options are, when you create a custom role, should the custom role have no access to dashboards, read only view, or read write view edit to create custom dashboards, for example? Yeah. What options do we have under incident response? Yeah. View edit for everything. I'm an instance administrator. What can you do in the action center? So if you want to add your own role, you can add your own role. Yeah. Custom role. Yeah. Test role. I won't save this off. But yeah, you can then customize completely what, if you assign this role to a user, what should they get when they go into dashboards and reports? Nothing. They won't even see it. Or just the dashboards, read only. Yeah. So that's how you customize. So assign a role name, description, the components to provide access to. And another feature that is supported with Cortex XDR is there is another role, a built-in role, that is called scoped user admin. And the idea of scoped user admin, some of you mentioned I've got 30,000 agents or 10,000 agents. Maybe some users should not even see information about some of them. You only want them to see the information about the workstations, not about the servers or just the Linux machines, whatever it might be, yeah? So what we can do is restrict access to some endpoints in specific console pages. When they go into endpoint administration, they'll only see the endpoints that they are scoped to access. When they perform action in the action center, they can only target the scoped endpoints. when they go into dashboards or reports, they only see the widgets and the reporting based on the endpoints that are within their scope. So first of all, define a scope for the user. You can choose what scope name to assign. And then the idea is the user scope. Yeah. You basically find the user in the user list and then assign the endpoint scope. And the endpoint scope, by default, if we're not limited, is all endpoints. But you can do it based on groups. Yeah. So my group of Linux servers, my group of Windows servers in data center 1, not in data center 2. Yeah. So on the user itself, right click, assign endpoint scope, and choose which groups they should have access to. And that's called scoped base access control, an extension of role-based access control. Well done, everyone. Yeah, a bit of a dry wind down module, but hopefully by the end, you already know how to get to the customer support portal, how to work with roles, understanding a bit about the XDR infrastructure services, some of the install regions we provide. You know how to access apps.paloaltonetworks.com, the steps required to activate an instance, a bit about the custom roles and predefined roles, how to work with them, and how to restrict access to certain information about some endpoints in the management console by using scope-based access control. Yeah. And there is no lab for that one. Absolutely no lab for that. That's our wind down module, everyone. Yeah. So I really hope it's been a very useful class for you. I know it's very much workshop style, a lot of information in the 3 days, but a lot of good hands-on labs. For those of you that will continue tomorrow morning, I'll see you tomorrow morning, yeah? I won't say long goodbyes. For those of you that aren't attending 262 tomorrow, again, please do book in on the next EPT for it, if you haven't already done so. It's a great class, because this one's, I think, it's a great class, yeah? But the 262 is more fun. We're doing the analysis and response, advanced analysis and response. I'm seeing Jackson's message. It's too rainy today for Jimmy. Yeah, so Jimmy, yeah, I haven't seen him all day. And Kent, really lovely message. Thank you very much. I'm so glad. Yeah, so please, you don't need to rush. If you want to stay with me to go keep on doing labs or anything like that, you're welcome to. The only thing I'd ask of you is to make sure, again, you know what I'm going to ask you, that you have completed the course survey before you leave. Otherwise, you won't. You'll forget all about it. Yeah. And download your course attendance certificate as well. Yeah. So the couple of you, I think poor Manuel was in Mexico, right? So Manuel has been sitting this class in the middle of the night. So he dropped off, I think, at lunchtime today. So I'll excuse Manuel, but the rest of you are here. Yeah. Except Yves, who I marked as a no-show. Yeah. So please complete it. It's been my pleasure to have you for the 3-day class. I look forward to seeing some of you from tomorrow for 262. Thank you, Kent. Yeah. Have a great night. Hope to see you again. Yeah. Come and do another class with us. Another EPT. Yeah. Prisma Access. If you haven't ever sat a firewall course before, like EDU 210, our firewall essentials. Thank you, Sammy. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, Joseph, thank you very much for the kind messages. Yeah, come and sit. EDU 210, fantastic. The world's best next generation firewall and a great class. Or Panorama, the firewall troubleshooting. We're offering lots of good partner training. Thank you, Jack. You've all made it very easy, especially compared to last week for me. See you next time. All the best. No rush if any of you are still doing labs. I'll stay joined to the session. I'll probably end the session in about half an hour. Yeah. Thank you very much, Gordon. Carter also. Yeah. Okay. See you next time. Thank you, Thomas. You don't need to call me Mr. Thomas. Thank you very much, Jackson. Great. Yeah, it's a really, compared to a Monday morning, if you haven't seen Cortex XDR before this class, you actually are very much empowered by the end of the course. You know what it can do. You know how to navigate, how to configure the agent settings. you see it works as well. It's a fantastic lab environment with a Metasploit on the Linux attack server, the personal malware that they generate for us that hasn't been seen by Wildfire before. So I think the way that Palo Alto Networks built this lab environment, really, I'm a huge fan. Yeah, I think they've done a great job. Yeah. Thank you so much. All the best to you. Yeah. I'll go quiet. Call out if you need help, if you're still doing lab, if you want. Otherwise, you are free. Yeah. By the way, those of you not attending tomorrow, the VMs are still available for you until Sunday. Your access to the XDR instance is still available to all of you until Sunday. To call it through Saturday, not all day Sunday. We have to re-provision the lab environment again. Yeah. But if you're not sitting tomorrow, you have access to your VMs. Keep that text file if you want it, and the instance until Saturday, all through Saturday. Great. Thank you, Jackson. So very happy. Make sure you tell Palo Alto Networks that as well. Yeah. Do your evals, to your surveys. Yeah. See you tomorrow, Jackson. Very good. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Carter. See you next time. Yes, Sammy, thank you for doing your eval so early. Great. I saw you did yours very early. Great. Well, Jason's doing his, maybe left already. Gary's completing now. That's why you're still around. Gary, thank you. Very good. Perfect. Yeah. And Tom. Yeah, Gary and Tom, I'll be very happy if you can submit your survey sometime this afternoon, but no rush. Yeah. Awesome. Ah, you have no events. Thomas, thank you so much. That's really lovely to say. Yeah, I look forward to meeting you again tomorrow also. Tom, you don't see an event? Yeah.
I am sorry that, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
that we didn't say anything during the course, but I just want to say we really enjoy your
That's okay.
sharing.
I know some people are a bit shy to talk during class. I try to encourage, yeah, let's have a conversation. So, I appreciate you saying that. For me, I've been instructor off and on for many years. Yeah, not always instructor, but most of my time has been in a classroom. Yeah, before COVID days, it was only in a classroom with 12 people, 16 people maybe. And it's very different in a classroom. So I've had to get used to using Zoom, sometimes using Teams as well. I normally do have my camera turned on most of the time. This week with my cold, I've just felt so terrible and having to, look after myself. So I apologize for that. Thank you for your understanding. Yeah.
Of course, we wish you getting well so soon.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Okay.
All right then. So we will leave now, and thank you again. I would meet you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. It's a different link. Yeah, different Zoom link, new course. So make sure you find your email and everything. I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
And Tom, you were saying you have no events in Beacon. So Tom, the trick in Beacon is you must, otherwise you wouldn't be on the class list. So maybe under all events you don't see, but click on my events. Yeah, click on my events, not all events. And if the status is not